Welcome to another live reading of The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth. Authors are Monica Shu and Barbara Moore. And I'm going to pick up at the name of this chapter is Son's Victory Over the Dark Mother. And I think I've just been given the layout of the reading every time that I read, which is I'm going to read for the first 2 hours or just from like 8:30 to 10:15 or something like that, and then just open the space for comments or reactions or what have you for the last 15 minutes or 10 minutes. So yeah, I'm going to get started. Son's Victory, and that's S-U-N, Son's Victory Over the Dark Mother. Whatever. I don't want it to be. But it's helping. It's helping me see. Okay. Sumerian culture can be traced back to circa 5500 BC in the alluvial plains of Lower Mesopotamia. Sumerians wrote on clay tablets. Archaeologists have proclaimed, Sumerians wrote on clay tablets. Archaeologists have proclaimed that his history begins at Sumer. For that reason only, that Sumerians wrote it all down. Their inscribed myths thus qualify as the world's oldest known literature. What does this Sumerian literature record? As Thompson says, the clay tablets reveal the remains of a revolution, a shift from the dominant female gods of the Neolithic village to the organizing and controlling male gods of the literate city. One of these transitional myths gives us the story of a fabulous character who can fairly be called Enki the Prick. Enki was the water god, and the Sumerian word for water also meant semen. In a lavish ode to his indistinguishable phallus, Enki virtually floods the Sumerian plains with semen. Enki is a funny guy. He also inseminates all the Sumerian people, including his own daughters and their daughters. The ancient earth goddess Ninhursag can't take it any longer. Her daughter Utu also is inseminated by the new ebullient All-Father. Ninhursag removes Enki's semen from her daughter and turns it into plants, which Enki eats, of course, becoming pregnant with his own semen. He gets very sick. Only by crawling into Ninhursag's vagina with her help can he then give birth to 8 goddesses, all named for different parts of his body. This myth is profoundly ambiguous, as Thompson says. It is also grotesquely funny because it is recording in one story the mid-stride shift of worldview from matriarchy to patriarchy in ancient Sumer. Sumer began as a goddess-oriented agricultural village. It ended as a civilization which grew not from a city, but from a fortress, the fortified granary. Real life changes slowly, but in a myth like Enki in the world order, complex changes over time are compressed into a simultaneous image, showing the proud, all-propagating potency and world-ordering power of the new male regime, still entangled in and ultimately dependent upon the wisdom and physical capacity of the old order, the earth goddess, to get the job done. The job, of course, is an impossible one, a mythic delusion, to turn the father into a mother. It could only be done in Sumer anyway, as a kind of slapstick comedy with Enki as all 3 stooges. But he learns. In later stories, the great goddess Inanna, queen of heaven and mother of 300,000 years of human time, must come humbly to Enki, petitioning him for a place in the new male order. There is nothing for her to do or be. Man has taken over everything. As Enki boasts, Enki perfected greatly that which is woman's task. Men had indeed co-opted all of women's craft and quote unquote improved upon it. And as Enki demonstrated, he's trying hard to do the same with childbirth and motherhood. As Thompson notes, with increased militarization and urbanization through the new male world came a revealing change in the mythic character of the goddess. From an all-powerful and open great mother, she becomes a seductive and wily sex goddess. No doubt this is because men were writing the myths, but the mythic shift also reveals the change real women had to undergo. The goddess becomes eroticized for her life. The new male god is armed and arrogant and no longer in awe of her reproductive powers or her cultural creations. To survive, she must seduce and lure and petition him. But still, the humbled Inanna in this story gets nothing from Enki but an impatient brush off. He tells her she has lots to do. She can tend sheep, observe his wars, and twist thread. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero kills the sacred bull of heaven, Inanna's bull. The bull symbolized Earth's fertility, the moon, so many things. The horns surmounting the breast on the walls of Katal Hayuk, the crescent horn in the uplifted hand of the Venus of Lausul. What does Gilgamesh do with the horns of the sacred bull of heaven? He hangs them up in his room like a hunting trophy, a decoration for his male clubhouse. In this act, the old conservative religion of women is being mocked in a celebration of male ambition. The Gilgamesh epic dates from 1600 to 2000 BC. Thompson calls this 4,000-year-old story the very foundation of Western literature. For what we are witnessing here is to set the pattern for all Hebrew and Greek literature to come. This new individuating, mocking, arrogantly alienated ego of Gilgamesh, established in defiance of the old religion of the goddess and the earth, becomes in Western religious and secular history the ego of man, mocker of the past, builder of tomorrow, etc. This effort to displace the female seems to be the archetypal foundation for civilization, for mankind has been at it ever since. Whether he is challenging Mother Nature and flying away from her in rockets, or in changing her on Earth through genetic engineering, man has not given up in the attempt to take away the mystery of life from the Great Mother and the conservative feminine religion. There were women who fought the patriarchy, tribes of Amazons in Syria, Thrace, Macedonia, and Africa, defended themselves from invasion and fought to preserve their matriarchal religion and culture against the onslaughts of the rising sun god. We know these warrior women through Greek myth mostly. One of their last battles was fought on the Greek mainland against Greek male soldiers. The Amazons lost, fighting to the death. Memorials to them were set up all over the Greek countryside, marking each place an Amazon had fallen in battle, and their valor, beauty, and strength were long depicted in Greek art. Even the male sun god warriors praised them as ferocious and fearless fighters. J.J. Bachelfen in Myth, Religion, and Mother Right declared that the rise of Father Right began with the wars against the Amazon cultures. He also says that after the wars, the surviving Amazonian women settled down, built cities, engaged in agriculture. Their nomadic horse life was over, but they still accomplished great things. From the Nile banks, the shores of the Black Sea, from Central Asia to Italy to West Africa, Amazon names and deeds are interwoven with the historical founding of famous cities. Hera fought at Troy as leader of the Mysian women warrior troops. She goes unmentioned by Homer in Bachelfin's opinion because she was more beautiful and more interesting than Helen, the star of Troy. Because what we know of Amazons comes down to us as myth, We have been taught to doubt their actual existence, but myth records the real history of the ancient preliterate world. Its accuracy is proven when real Troys are dug up at the legendary sites of legendary Troys. Ancient legends tell that the wild horse was first tamed and ridden by Amazons of old Libya, which is now Morocco. The moon goddess is therefore everywhere connected with the horse, the white mare. This is where the nightmare comes from. Moroccan leather was originated by the Amazons, who fashioned it into tall, pliable, dark red boots. Julius Caesar, in his historical memoirs, speaks respectfully of the great queen Semiramis, who ruled Syria and led its Amazon troops into battle. Caesar also notes that Amazons once ruled most of Asia. When Roman troops entered Europe, they were commonly confronted by tribes of both female and male warriors, led by great warrior kings like Boudica of the Britons and Valada of the Gauls. African Amazon warrior women were still alive and well in 19th century Dahomey, and an elite Amazon corps of 5,000 women was instrumental in winning the independence of African Malawi in 1964. It wasn't Amazon women alone who wanted to retain the ancient matriarchal cultures. There were men too, with a living mother goddess consciousness, who did not voluntarily give up the practice of her ways. Death, rebirth, and ecstasy through her being, experienced in joyful, fearful, and orgiastic rites, are crucial to the psychic balance and health of men as of women. All legends indicate that the reciprocally gynandrous androgynous, so gynandrous androgynous nature of female and male relationships in goddess cultures was split apart by force. The force of heavy patriarchal arms and ideology. Here is a Hebrew myth telling how God the Father separated the originally bisexual twins. God found the male upper waters and the female lower waters locked into a passionate embrace. Let one of you rise, he ordered, and the other fall. But they rose together, whereupon God asked, why did you rise together? We are inseparable, they answered with one voice. Leave us to our love. God now stretched out his little finger and tore them apart. The upper he lifted up high, the lower he cast it down. To punish their defiance, God would have singed them with fire. The divided waters then voiced their agony of loss by blindly rushing toward each other and flooding the mountaintops. But when the lower waters lapped at the very feet of God's throne, he shouted in anger and tramped them or her under his feet. And so the war god Yahweh came to power. When the official Genesis of the Hebrew Bible was written, the ancient goddess was described in negative abstractions: chaos, darkness, the deep. Tehom, the mother of all, is biblically defined as mud, the swamp, some mindless beast of matter who must be kept under paranoid patriarchal control and always subject to the Father's logos or word. Tehom, meaning the abyss, the dark night, the lower waters, has always since crouched submissively. I just was Tehom has always since crouched submissively in her deep abode, like a huge beast, sending up springs to those who deserve them and nourishing the tree roots. Though she thus influences human fate, none may visit her recesses. The goddess creatrix that Yahweh displaced was a goddess of the moon and so of fertility and water. Her fertility involved more than protoplasmic multiplication. It involved the entire cosmic creation and all of life, as well as psychic rebirth, the energy of the mind, imagination. The women's cultures are portrayed in these myths as a chaotic commingling of the two sexes, in parentheses, of humans, animals, and vegetation in ecstatic, spiritual, poetic animism, which messy commingling delays and obstructs the establishment of patriarchal social order. as rain pouring down into the sea delays the appearance of dry land. Under the ancient rule of water, such disorder and chaos prevailed that wise men avoid all mention of it. Tisk. So the female and male principles must first be decently separated and put in their places, as when the Egyptian father god Shu lifts the sky goddess Nut from her embrace with the earth god Geb. When the Babylonian sun hero Marduk sliced Tiamat in two, he was really parting her from Apsu, god of the upper waters. Tiamat, the formidable Babylonian mother goddess, was the model for the Hebrew Tehom. Tiamat was mother of the deep who fashioned all things. She displayed herself as night, truth, and justice, Tehomat, or Tehom Ma'at. And Ma'at is the Egyptian goddess of truth and justice. Tiamat gave birth to the gods. Then, in later patriarchal epic, the gods rebel against her, and she is finally conquered by the sun god hero Marduk, who had been promised supremacy over the gods if he did so. I just want to say one thing real quick. Chaos. Chaos is I believe it's on Netflix. If it's not on Netflix, it's a miniseries. It's either on Netflix or Prime. It's Jeff Goldblum is one of the stars, and it's some other people in there, but he is Zeus in there. And like I said, it's a mini series, but it's all about a prophecy, and it's about chaos returning, and Zeus not wanting. Okay, yes, Dr. B. I just finished it up. I binge watched it, but I watched it as like a student, like I watched it with. Oh, it was good. It was good. So yes, interesting. Okay, so back to this. I'm just gonna start where I was. Then in later patriarchal epic, yes, you're gonna like it, especially watching it from the way I know you're gonna watch it from. It's good. Then, in later patriarchal epic, the gods rebel against her, and she is finally conquered by the sun god hero Marduk, who had been promised supremacy over the other gods if he did so. He slays her in her form of the great whale dragon or cosmic serpent, and she then surrenders her own body as building material for the universe. Note that in the original matriarchal creation myths, the Great Mother always sacrifices her body herself voluntarily to create the world from her substance. In patriarchal myth, the basic idea is maintained, but the mother body is not actively but passively surrendered. The father god world is essentially created through male conquest and an act of matricide. This is what Elizabeth Gould Davis has to say about Tiamat. In Sumerian myth, the creator goddess Tiamat appeared out of the waves of the Erythraean Sea, the Persian Gulf, as a fish woman, and taught men the arts of life. Quote, to construct cities, to found temples, to compile laws, in short, instructed them in all things that tend to soften and humanize life. From that time, so universal were her instructions that nothing had to be added, end quote. Davis believes Tiamat may have been a matriarchal queen of the Thracian Anatolian remnant of the ancient lost civilization of Atlantis, that she might have sailed down the Euphrates River from Thrace to Anatolia, perhaps circa 9000 BC, in a ship whose figurehead was the mermaid-like creature of many ancient legends, half fish, half woman. Because myth was both a historic record and a psychic gestalt of universal symbols, the line between historic literalism and mythic symbolic interpretation is often blurry. And that's what makes archaeological and linguistic evidence important. Most Near Eastern myths that have come down to us derive from a time when at least part of the matriarch's divine functions had been delegated to her male warrior consort. These myths date from 2500 to 1500 BC. The solar hero in all cultures corresponds with the establishment of patriarchal order. And order everywhere means the suppression and negation of the great mother religion. The Greek sun god Apollo represents purification and renewal through the male. The sun, S-U-N dash S-O-N, the sun, bringing light, life, and spring back to the world by killing the python serpent of the mother, represented as the dragon of darkness, now exclusively dark, chaotic, evil. These are our classic dragon stories. The serpent of chaos is originally and always a woman's body. As the great mother of chaos, a matter still unformed and undifferentiated, she holds the earth like an egg in the pure energy of her coils. She represents the time before the gods, before the establishment of patriarchal hierarchies and distinctions. As the dragon of matter, the undivided one, older than the individuation of forms, she also signified the common flesh and blood bond of the people. This is why the snake/dragon everywhere is identified with the indigenous masters of the ground, the matrifocal peasantry, who are invaded, conquered, plundered, co-opted by the dragon slayers of patriarchal history. In Indian myth, the Indo-European sky god Indra comes upon the goddess Danu and her son Vitra, the two Dravidian serpent creators, or the great cow goddess and her calf. They are described as undivided or bisexual, unawakened, sunk in deepest sleep, outstretched. Indra hurls his phallic lightning and decapitates them. This murder generates the act of creation. Since in the Indo-European view, the dark serpentine Danu and Vitra had withheld the waters in the mountain hollows and so hindered the world from coming into being. The Indo-European patriarchal world, that is. Tehom, or Tiamat Apsu, or Danu Vitra, were obviously names for the magnetic serpentine spirit of the earth and its underground waters. The bisexual power, who was absolute mistress of all chaos before creation. Her/his sacrifice then enables patriarchal creation, i.e., law and order, to appear. It is the custom in India before a single stone is laid in the foundation of a sacred building for the local astrologer to determine the exact spot of ground which is situated above the head of the snake that supports the world. Construction rites begin with an imitation of Indra smiting the serpent Danu or Vitra in his or her lair. A wooden peg is driven into this spot to securely peg down the serpent's head. It is said in the Rig Veda, if this snake should ever shake its head violently, it would shake the world to pieces. So with patriarchy, it is the death of the world snake that supports male world being. But patriarchy needs the serpent energy, which is the subterranean energy that powers all life. Everyone knows the serpent is not really dead, but repressed. And the paranoid patriarchal obsession with law and order is the necessary mechanism of this repression. This worldwide attack and conquest of the cosmic serpent is called in patriarchal story the victory over the waters, through which emerged stable forms and the organization of the world. That is the male political world. The Rock of Jerusalem reached deep into the subterranean waters, parentheses, Tehom, it was said. The Jerusalem temple is situated directly above her, its holy rock containing the mouth of Tehom. Babylon was built above the gate of Apsu, the serpent waters before creation, Apsu, the other half of Tiamat. Everywhere, this mythic rite of building the holy male city on the conquered body of the mother serpent is enacted as the origin of patriarchy. The sun-worshipping pharaohs of later Egypt slay the dragon Apophis. Apollo slays Gaia's python. The Greek hero Perseus slays the Amazonian Medusa, who is described as three-headed, the triple goddess, with snakes writhing from her three heads. St. George slays the dragon in England. Even St. Patrick must drive the snake from snakeless Ireland. And in Hebrew Genesis, the serpent is doomed by the war god Yahweh to be forever the enemy of the human race, to be crushed under our heels, and to give back to us only poison. In Christian prophecy in Revelation 12, in Revelation 12:21, 12-21, I don't know if that's Revelation chapter 12. I'm going to say in Revelation chapter 12, I believe, verse 1, or somewhere, read Revelation chapter 12. The final extinction of the dragon is promised when a king Messiah kills the watery cosmic snake and then takes over the world throne unchallenged. And there was no more sea. That's in quotes. This event is prefigured in Psalm 74:13. Quote, thou breakest the heads of dragons in the waters, end quote. The consistency of all these myths is commensurate with their reality. To the ancients, the cosmic serpent, the spirit of earth and water, was everywhere known as the energy source of life, of healing and oracular powers, fertility and maternal blessing. This energy spirit, with emerging patriarchy, was redefined as the dangerous enemy to be reviled, defeated, destroyed. Then it was said by the new holy men that chaos has been ordered and the serpent force has been mastered. And what was to be the new source of world energy? Slave labor, military force, the rule of the fist, threats of punishment and coercion by fire breathing, guilt mongering male priesthoods in service to the god of war and wealth. In Babylon, the combat between the god hero Marduk and the great sea dragon Tiamat was ceremonially reenacted every new year. Marduk's victory was celebrated by the priest as an end to chaos and darkness. Marduk creates the cosmos again from the torn fragments of Tiamat's body, and he creates man from the blood of the demon Kingu, to whom Tiamat had entrusted the tablets of destiny. May he continue to conquer Tiamat and shorten her days, exclaimed the celebrants. The cosmic combat, the hero's victory, and the new creation were imagined to take place at the same moment every new year. The chaos and darkness conquered by Marduk had clear social class implications. In Mircea Eliade's words, the slain body of Tiamat symbolized universal confusion, the abolition of order and hierarchy, orgy, chaos. According to the 4th century BC historian Berosus of Babylon, where Tiamat prevailed, the slaves became the masters and all power of rank was abolished. Probably the ancient moon rites were still celebrated on the last 12 days surrounding the last moonless nights of the year. These days were sacred to the dark moon, full of oracular power, before the birth of the new year's new moon. And these last days were described as pre-creation chaos. The laws of time were suspended. Hecate roamed the black countryside. The dead rose up and came to the living in hope of new birth. Orgiastic rites were held. Then, with the appearance of the new moon, the recreation of the world magically occurred. New fires were lit, the earth and her cycles were reaffirmed. First fruit ceremonies took place, and the people saw prevention of sorrows and diseases from the coming year. The god hero New Year celebrations were simply overlaid on these ancient rites. In the most ancient times, goddess shrines were in groves by sacred wells, in caves on mountaintops. During the megalithic, large stone chambers were built over blind springs, and the builders consulted astronomical and earth forces to understand their ever-changing currents. With the building of huge cities and enormous solar temples, architects were attempting to fix and permanently control the flow of the earth current. In Babylon and Egypt, patriarchy built vast, rigid monuments to the god kings in urban centers where excess grain and other products extracted from the countryside and taxes were piled up to the greater power and glory of the ruling priesthoods. No longer sensitive to the earth's spiritual energies, their priesthoods were no longer themselves channels of real cosmic and terrestrial power. Instead, they resorted to conscious, deliberate manipulation of human fears, more and more frantic invocations and bloody mass sacrifices to no avail. The real spirit was wandering elsewhere, but the buildings became more grandiose, imposing, and expensive. One thing the patriarchal orders of all times and places have in common: huge and square cut blocks of stone that no longer have spiritual resonance or healing power for the human psyche. The cosmic serpent no longer lives in these stones. These rock metropolises, Iron Age or modern, only secular ambition lives there. The ancients warned that attempts to direct and fix the earth force for selfish gain are doomed. Earth energies, artificially trapped to serve the special interests of the ruling class of men, create the tension field, the anxiety grid of modern life. Like a fault stress in the earth or a great serpent underground, something seems about to recoil and unleash terrific energy. The spirit will always break loose and take its own path once again. Once again. I love it. Next chapter, the sun god. The sun cult, the worship of the sun god, and an all-male priesthood was typically established, as in Babylon and Egypt, by the edict of a military dictatorship. In pre-patriarchal Egypt, the goddess Nekhebt, the vulture, was worshipped in Upper Egypt, and Wazit, the Wajet. Okay, spelled differently here, but I see it. It's Wajet, the cobra goddess, in Lower Egypt. Nekhebt was the inventor of agriculture, a great healer and physician, and the bringer of laws and justice. Egypt was strongly matriarchal, and women entered and achieved in all professions. Even in later Egypt, women studied together in the medical schools, and many famous physicians were women. After the invasion of Egypt by Indo-Europeans circa 3000 BC, Lower and Upper Egypt were united under a newly instituted kingship, and the dynastic era began. The invaders, calling themselves the followers of Horus, formed an aristocracy or master race that ruled over all Egypt. The word pharaoh, in parentheses that says, means simply great house, was applied to the royal male alone. Male deities quickly then rose to power over the Egyptian goddesses. Horus, the god of light, was transformed into the official son of the great mother Isis. Isis comes from Aset, the throne, and immortal queen of heaven. Isis incorporated the more ancient Wajet, the great cobra goddess who created all existence. She also wore the vulture wings belonging to Nekhebt. Together, her brother and moon lover Osiris, Isis was worshipped. No, together with her brother and moon lover Osiris, Isis was worshipped by the common people far into Roman times. Her cult became the most important mystery religion of Rome itself, and Isis with the Horus child is reflected in the Roman Catholic worship of the Madonna and Child. Isis, like the great goddess everywhere, was the still point of the turning world. Crowned by the lunar disk, she rises from the ocean at night to say, I am nature, the universal mother, single manifestation of all gods and goddesses am I. In Bronze Age Egypt, the cult of the sun god Ra was introduced by a privileged male priesthood for their own political and military purposes. The older lunar calendar was changed into a solar calendar through the introduction of 5 intercalary days. To accommodate this new belief, the resurrected moon god Osiris was re-identified by the priesthood with the sun. The people were now supposed to forget what was written on the gate of the ancient goddess Nut. Quote, what there is, what will be, what has been is me. Nobody has uncovered my chiton. The fruit that I bore was the sun, end quote. Instead of being the fruit of the great mother tree, the male governors of the earth, instead of being the fruit of the great mother tree, the male governors of the Egyptian dynasties now pretended to have been created by a father god. He, Ptah, was supposed to have created the other gods through an act of masturbation. Right on, Ptah. This lady be tripping me out sometimes. Ramses II the Great was a Bronze Age pharaoh, probably identically. I'm sorry. Ramses II the Great was a Bronze Age pharaoh, probably identical with the pharaoh of the biblical record. Ramses II declared himself born by the sun god Ra. During 67 years of fascistic rule, he hammered his superiority into the heads of the people and built, or had built for him, countless temples and palaces stretching from the Nile Delta through Luxor and Karnak to the Sudan. He controlled a victorious army and troops of cheap workers. His political religious edifices already had the characteristics of mass production. And at the age of 8, he owned a harem of women who subsequently bore him 100 children. Moses, the founder of the Jewish Christian patriarchy, received his education and moral conceptions at the palace of this Ramses and his predecessor circa 1300 BC. Ra, the sun, was believed to fight daily the serpent of darkness known as Zet, later Apophis. Zet was originally the ancient cobra goddess Wajet of matriarchal pre-dynastic Egypt. It was officially declared that law and order were were possible only so long as the cobra goddess was kept under the direct control of the pharaoh and his priests. In this way, they were saving the people from the dark serpent, the dark mother. But just as attributes of the snake and bird goddess Neith were retained in the classic Greek Athene, so attributes of the ancient cobra and vulture goddess Wajet Nekhbt were retained in Isis. She wore a cobra on her forehead with cow horns flanked by feathers. Hathor also continued to be worshipped by the people as the great cow goddess. Ma'at, the ancient mud matter mother goddess who symbolized the order of the universe, now became known as the Eye of Horus, that is, the eye of the sun, of Ptah, and of Ra. The Egyptian word for eye was wajet, very like wajet, and Ma'at was the embodiment of the primordial Uraeus cobra. To her was assigned ultimate wisdom and danger, rebellion and chaos, and she was allowed to retain these qualities so long as she was firmly contained within a male godhead, his eye, and magically guarded by the king. In other words, Ma'at embodied the dangerous elements of the ancient classless culture of the native Egyptians who worshiped the ecstatic goddess and her energy. They had constantly to be held in check. So they had constantly to be held in check by political, military force and priestly dogma. All the religious, spiritual, and cultural values that had been symbolized by the moon of Isis were now strategically transferred by the priests to the sun cults coming under male control. The surviving moon religion in Egypt remained in the hands of women, but it was the sun god and his stolen powers that publicly ruled. This was the pattern. The sun hero who vanquishes evil in the form of monster serpents or dragons was originally a moon hero like Hercules, and as such, the sun lover of the great goddess. In Moon Mysteries, he overcame death in ecstatic self transcendence, experiencing luminous oneness with her. But when he becomes the patriarchal sun hero, he kills the mother goddess in her dark underworld serpent aspect. Instead of transcending his ego, he transcends the whole world, cosmic union giving way to worldly conquest and destruction of the sources of life. He destroys life in the name of conquering death. Jungian psychoanalysts interpret this process as the liberation of the individual ego, the male ego, of course, from the forces of darkness and the unconscious, i.e., the mother. The hero's action in rescuing the maiden from the dragon symbolizes, Jung says, the freeing of his own anima, his essential self, from the devouring aspect of the mother. This almost suggests that woman in herself is merely a projection of the male anima. And indeed, that when that, wait, let me say that again. That almost suggests that woman in herself is merely a projection of the male anima. And indeed, that's what women are in most psychoanalytical systems. Jungians have never shown an awareness of the politics of mythology or of mythology as the history of the preliterate real world. The sun hero is doing more than liberating his ego from the mother. He is liberating his being from responsibility to the being of the world. He liberates himself by arrogantly and recklessly destroying the interconnecting webwork of which he is a part. And then the tragic hero is surprised when he looks around himself and sees nothing but wasteland and death. Alexander the Great slew no dragons. Instead, he slashed through the Gordian knot with his sword. Knots symbolize the goddess as great weaver of the life web. Knots are sacred to witches and used in magic spells. Oh, I'm sorry, dang, I wish I had my pen. Interesting. Rhyme and meter, in fact, and other poetic chanting devices are linguistic knots used to bind up, to concentrate the magic energies of language. The necktie was originally a magic device, a spell knot against throat codes. By impatiently and arrogantly cutting, thank you. I do want to make a note here real quick, guys. As I've been tying knots into this yarn as I meditate. Interesting. Okay. All right, sorry. The necktie was originally a magic device, a spell knot against throat codes. By impatiently and arrogantly cutting the magic knot with his sword, instead of going into a trance or waiting until he knew how to untie it, Alexander was historically signaling the triumph of patriarchy. The sun hero slashes through the timeless web of interconnecting life energy and lays it all waste in order to enjoy swift satisfaction, fame, and conquest. Conquest of what? Of the fact that life is a paradox. Number one, the fact that psychic powers are deeply hidden and dangerous, needing to be guarded by wisdom. In parentheses, the serpent guarding the treasure. And two, the fact that their release can cause destruction as easily as integration. The sun hero wars against the double-edged reality of the cosmic process, slashing through paradox, denying cyclic recurrence, and the serpent wisdom that comes with it. Refusing to believe that his ego must die before the true magic power can be safely revealed. From Marduk to Superman, he is a little boy warring against the subtle serpentine nature of life, demanding it be made neat, simplistic, logical, unambiguous, designed as a flat stage for his triumph and nothing more. In The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir catalogs male hatred and fear of woman because she presents him with the ambiguities of life and death. His classic response to these ambiguities is denial and conquest. The organ, or in parentheses, they have the man, penetrates the same as that which gives birth to the child. Man finds it repugnant to come upon the dreaded essence of the mother in the woman he possesses. He is determined to disassociate these two aspects of femininity. Yeah, wait. Man finds it repugnant to come upon the dreaded essence of the mother in the woman he possesses. He is determined to dissociate these two aspects of femininity and tends to keep away from woman during her menses when she is pregnant in lactation. The old woman, the homely woman, arouse hatred mingled with fear. In them reappears the disquieting figure of the mother when once the charms of the wife have vanished. Man wishes simultaneously that woman be animal and plant and that she be hidden behind an artificial front. He is delighted with his domination of her. Born from the woman's flesh, entering her womb in love, entombed in a female earth in death, man's horror of his own carnal contingents, man's horror of his own carnal contingents is projected on women and on the world in heroic acts of slashing, denial, and domination. Patriarchal religions and political states are the institutions of this dominion, and warfare is its tool, its mechanism. Among the Bronze Age warrior tribes spreading over the Neolithic earth, the acquisition of wealth through raids and conquest became a powerful factor in dispossessing women, parentheses, matriarchal cultures, and keeping them dispossessed. The loot from raids and battle belonged to the victorious men, as did the land conquered by sword and broad axe. Women were an important part of the victor's loot. The Bronze Age warrior's world was neatly divided between the victorious male and his spoils and everything: women, children, animals, land, and resources. All the rest of life constituted the spoils. This is why patriarchy's inaugural epics and myths, from the Mahabharata of Vedic India to the Greek Iliad to the heroic age epics of the Hebrew, Teutonic, and Celtic peoples, are all the same: an endless glorification of war. These warrior tales clearly describe a new battle-loving aristocracy that was breaking up the old established matriarchal world order with ferocious conquest and formidable iron weaponry. All the ancient unwritten laws of human intercourse were broken up also, as the warrior made his own rules, fiendishly designed to make himself come out on top every time. The sun god or sky father of the invaders was everywhere imposed on the indigenous earth and moon worshipping people. Where the great mother was not eliminated entirely, she was married to the conquering sky father in epics, folktales, and customs. She was retold into a harmless, powerful wife. She never appears again with any power except the pejorative powers of the jealous, nagging wife or the seductive bad woman Jezebel, whore of Babylon, and so forth. The pattern was repeated everywhere. The Sumerians, who invaded Mesopotamia circa 3000 BC, plundered the superior civilization of the settled matriarchal inhabitants and put their own solar king on the throne. The solar king was surrounded by solar priests who rewrote religion into a mythic spiritual rationalization of war, conquest, and royal hierarchy. Since the sun god rose to power through the war and conquest, it follows that the mythology, popular epics, and religious doctrine of worldwide patriarchy should stress and glorify the virtues of warriors. Fascism is inherent in a patriarchal worldview. Life came to be seen as a battleground in which the victor deserves his spoils. The Indo European Aryan peoples were tall, big boned, and light skinned. They entered history with a superior war technology. Where wagons drawn by donkeys had earlier been used only to transport goods and travelers, the Aryans turned them into horse drawn war chariots. Driving these chariots using iron weapons, nomadic Aryans swept down in huge hordes from the regions of the Russian steppes and the Kazakh. In several migrations over millennia into India, Mesopotamia, Greece, Europe, they looted, killed, and enslaved the smaller, darker agricultural goddess peoples who were trying to live in their bloody pathway. Everywhere they settled, the Indo Europeans established themselves as a priestly, intellectual, and warrior elite concerned mainly with military activities and administration of conquered territories. The conquered did the work. Racist theories equating darkness, evil, women, earth, passivity, impurity, inferiority, etc., in a grand master slave equation with Aryans as the masters are everywhere closely bound up with the defeat of the goddess worshiping women cultures of the southern regions by these iron dynamos from the north. The Celts were perhaps I'm sorry. That okay, I'm just gonna make a note and just go back and meditate on that one myself. That's deep. That's deep. The Celts were perhaps of or related to such Aryan origins called Keltoi by the Greeks, who first recorded them in 900 BC. They were tall, blue-eyed tribes that entered Europe from the east and swept across to the Atlantic. By the 3rd century BC, much of the territory from what is now Turkey to Scotland and Ireland and south through Spain was Celtic. Invaders that they were not patriarchal. Robert Graves has traced their Ogham script back to Anatolia and relates the original Celtic people to the remains of the Neolithic matriarchies of the Near East. Since ancient Anatolia, now Turkey, was once called Galatia, and branches of the Celts were called Galatians or Gauls, this connection makes sense. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote of the Celts, their wives are to every man the most sacred witness to his bravery. Tradition says that wavering armies have been rallied by women. They believe that the sex has a certain prescience and they do not, despite their counsels, and they do not despise their counsels or make light of their opinions. The Celts did not own slaves or believe in capital punishments. Their tribal councils were attended and often presided over by women, and their inheritance of property and also kingship was matrilineal. Their male leaders were elected, and they had a reputation for democratic practices. Whether they had origins similar to the Indo-Europeans or not, as the Celts moved into Europe, they assimilated much of the native Neolithic culture. Ancient pre-Celtic influences survived liberally among Celticized people in Ireland, Wales, Brittany, and the Basque Country, where survivors of the Stone Age matriarchies gathered around the North Atlantic. In Celtic law and custom, women were relatively free and powerful. They enjoyed greater economic, social, and sexual autonomy than women in present-day Britain, France, or America. The early Celtic Christian church was a suspect to the Roman Catholic Orthodoxy precisely because it was pro-woman. Women celebrated Mass. Women priests called conhospitae, women priests called conhospitae administered the sacramental wine while male priests distributed the wafers. St. Patrick and Roman Christianity finally ended Druidic worship in Ireland, as in England and France, but the Irish church retained much of its pagan mysticism. Wales and Ireland, even in medieval times, preserved Celtic language, art, and literature, including the visionary Olaf and bardic tradition of the goddess with its sacred tree alphabet. Jean Markel in Women of the Celts notes that the Gauls of France were Romanized very early and accepted Roman patriarchal law along with Roman Christianity. This was not the case in Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, probably because Roman soldiers were never heavily stationed in these British outposts. The Tuath, or tribe, was the basic political unit in Ireland, owning the land communally. Cattle, not land, was the basis of wealth and the medium of exchange. Women also owned herds. The ruler of the Tuath was commonly a man, but the queen was entitled to 1/3 of all war booty. There were many famous queen warriors like the British Queen Boudica in 61 BC. Powerful legendary women like Queen Maeve and Connaught were undoubtedly based on real people. Celtic women owned their own property and were free to choose their mates or husbands. In marriage, women didn't enter legally into the man's family but retained independent status and property. Desiring divorce, the woman simply took back her belongings and dowry. Marriage was not a religious ceremony and there was no concept of adultery. There were even annual marriages entered into by both women and men in which both parties agreed to be bonded for 1 year. At the end of the year, the bond was mutually renewed or abolished. Polyandry was practiced by some tribes. Children belonged to the tribe or the tuath. Legal contracts were made by the wife independently of her mate, and women were often the economic heads of families, with daughters inheriting equally with sons. Celtic heroes were named after their mothers, and heroism was not confined to men. When upper status Celts officially mated, she gave him a fine horse and a sword, and he gave her a fine horse and a sword. The mutual exchange of nobility was the ceremonial bond. Homosexuality was common among Celts and accepted. Male warriors were frequently lovers. Since sex was not related to religious moralism but to honor, bisexuality was considered normal. Wow. This is a signature of shamanic people, Celtic priests, the Druids, and Celtic oracular priestesses who followed more ancient traditions of ecstatic prophecy were often homosexual or bisexual. The Celtic priestess was similar to the Nordic vulva, who traveled the Scandinavian countryside, setting up large platforms covered with pelts from which she uttered prophecy and, in trance, answered questions about the future. The Voluspa saga, or soothsaying of the vulva, is such an utterance by a legendary seeress. All these practices, like the Druids, Celtic and Nordic priestesses with the present-day shamans of Asia and the ancient techniques of mantic utterance going back to the European Stone Age caves. So all these practices, let me say that again, make sure I said it right. All these practices link the Druids, Celtic, and Nordic priestesses with the present-day shamans of Asia and the ancient techniques of mantic utterance going back to the European Stone Age caves. Okay. When the all-male, highly patriarchal Roman troops entered Europe, let me see, okay, it's 929. When the all-male, highly patriarchal Roman troops entered Europe, as their historians tell us, they were often confronted by Gallic, Teutonic, and Celtic tribes led by warrior queens. Roman soldiers engaged in hand-to-hand combat with armed women, who they described as equal in size to the tribal men and fiercer in battle. The tribal bond of identity between the European women and men made them hard to persuade or to defeat. One of the clever devices used by the Roman military to divide and conquer the barbarians was to mock the tribal males for being ruled by women. Romans took captured men aside and laughed at them for allowing their women to be powerful and influential. The Roman army sold its bill of Roman goods to many Teutonic and Gallic males, promising them enhanced power and pleasure in the new regime if they would only turn against their women and become dominators of women like the Romans were. When the tribal males succumbed and disavowed their strong women as leaders and equal partners in war and love, the native tribes of Europe collapsed into disarray, and Rome moved into the continent without further serious opposition. From the beginnings of sun god patriarchy to the present day, imperialist invaders have used this sexploit to divide and conquer an indigenous people. To drive a wedge between women and men is the best way to demoralize people. To get men to despise and control their women is to turn them effectively against the very source of their being, against their mothers and their partners and the earth itself, earth as a being rather than a piece of property. Wherever and whenever it can, imperialism attempts to co-opt the belief energy of colonized males in this way by challenging their manhood vis-a-vis powerful and independent women. The sun god's troops can always be identified their manipulative no. The sun god's troops can always be identified by their manipulative misogyny and by their political relation to women as slaves, not as partners. This characteristic of imperialistic armies then becomes a device, a tool to further demoralize and rob the energies of a colonized people. Through imposition of patriarchal law, religion, and custom, imperialists tried to create among the conquered two hostile classes of humans, the male versus the female, no longer bound to each other by mutual respect and common history, but by mutual fear, antagonized by mutual guilty need. The manhood energy of conquered males is diverted away from rebellion and revolution and channeled into aggressive macho behavior toward women. Conquered, colonized, and enslaved males are told by their conquerors, in effect, you can't beat us, but you can beat your women. The history of imperialism is the history of this device in operation. On the heels of the woman mocking Roman, I'm sorry, the history of imperialism is the history of this device in operation. On the heels of the woman mocking Roman army came the woman cursing. I'm gonna say it one more time. The history of imperialism is the history of this device in operation. On the heels of the woman mocking Roman army came the woman cursing Christian missionaries, blaming all the conquered males' troubles on their evil women. Governments and religions manipulate colonized males into a betrayal of their own lives and their own people by first persuading young men to prove manhood by despising the female. And then native males are enrolled in the armies of their conquerors as terrorists, national guards, or death squads, upholding fascistic dictators in power. These young men are rewarded by being allowed to rape, torture, and slaughter their own people whom they have been persuaded to despise. Thus does the sun god enlist male troops in his war against the female earth and the earth's women. Why does this device work? Because the relation between the sexes is always very delicately balanced, very fragile. Balance is maintained by generations of ritual and custom. These are easily destroyed when people are invaded and colonized. The male ontological situation in particular is very fragile. In both hunting and war, men experience the acquisition of things they have not themselves produced. This can swell the ego's sense of power. Among Mother Goddess Stone Age people, as among Aboriginal hunting and gathering people everywhere, this danger is balanced by ritual propitiation and by the strong, intact spiritual perception that life is given, not taken. The aggressive war god ideology of patriarchy counters this perception, this humble sense of life with another. To the victor belongs the spoils. Y'all, see, y'all. I I read that so much in Kings. I gotta stop and comment because I can't believe how much. I mean, First and Second King. No, let's say Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. You see it. You see this all the time, and not once did I ever say, "Damn." Like, it's clear that this is some aggressive war god ideology. Now that I think about it, as many times as I read the Old Testament, back and front to back, I can see it clear as day now. That's crazy. Ooh. All right. The aggressive war god ideology of patriarchy counters this possession, this humble sense of life with another. To the victor belongs the spoils. Under the sun god, for the first time, the male ego is given power over the source of life. Weaklings wait for the gift to be given. Real men just take it. The Bronze Age celebration of war and hunting, seen as manly virtues and male sport, became precisely the celebration of power over women and over the female earth. It is the products of women's labor, women's body, and the body of Mother Earth herself, which are the spoils. I see it, Dr. B. Exactly. Even Freud could see it subliminally. Through her sexual power, he analyzed, woman is dangerous to the community, i.e., the male ego. All social structure rests on her ontological fearsomeness displaced to the father. Kings and other authority figures are slain by the people, not so they may be free, but so they can take on themselves a heavier yoke, one that protects them more absolutely from the terrible, i.e., exploited mother. The evolution of paternal domination into an increasingly more complex and powerful state system administered by men is thus, in Freud's view, a continuance of the primal repression, which has at its primal purpose the ever wider exclusion of women. Freud saw this, but in his patriarchal eyes, such a misogynistic repression and exclusion was necessary for the maintenance of civilization. Historically, imperial troops and native armies do not maintain this repression and exclusion of women by external force of arms alone. Patriarchal religious doctrine is the internal mechanism of oppression, God's pistol in the skull. Yikes. you European pagans were conquered ultimately not by the Roman eagle, but by the Hebrew sun god, Christ. In his name, missionaries preached the ultimate nihilism, the God-willed evil and worthlessness of earthly life, made foul at its source by woman's sin, and the apocalyptic goal of complete spiritual absorption into the heavenly sun, S-U-N/S-O-N, whose holy fires burn away all flesh. The bomb, of course, is the apotheosis of the patriarchal sun god. Man no longer needs to worship the sun. He can make his own and force the entire earth to bow down before it. Y'all. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. I'm just not even saying nothing. I'm just keep going. Yeah. We should all, look, that's why I'm glad I got the book, and the book is available via link. I got, a PDF. I can send it to you, or you can buy it, purchase it. I know it's on Amazon because that's where I got mine. And of course, it may be on some other platforms, but you definitely want to have this book, the actual book, to go back and do some studying and meditating on this stuff. Okay, the American hemisphere has its own sun god. In legend, the Mexican Aztecs originated to the north of Mexico. Their tribe was ruled over by a witch. I'm not gonna butcher this witch's name. I'm just not gonna do it. But okay, so their tribe was ruled over by a witch. Her name starts with an M, who had magic powers over all wild animals, birds, spiders, and plants. In a dream, her brother, golly, it's another name, who H, starts with an H. In a dream, her brother appeared to a priest, telling him to destroy the witch. So the brother promised that the Aztecs would win power and glory not through the old female ways of sorcery and enchanted being, but through male willpower and ruthless conquest, through strength and valor of heart and arm. The witch's brother was the Aztec war god. Following his priests, the Aztecs overthrew their women and their witch. In one legend, as the moon, a very wicked woman, she is beheaded and dismembered. Some speculate that Aztec rites of human sacrifice began here, at the origin of Aztec identity as sun warriors, with the ritual sacrifice by the war god of his sister, the moon witch. At least here began the Aztec trek south toward Mexico City and many generations of conquest and dominion. Nahuatl thought was great and complex. I guess that's maybe a tribe, I'm not sure, but Nahuatl, Nahuatl, thought was great and complex. In its highest reaches, the original bisexual Ometio, ooh, Aztec names are hard. The original bisexual Ometiotl, the dual lord, creates the world for pleasure. Life is a magic spectacle. Ometiotol's divine dream in which human beings perform and entertain her or him. In this ontology, the Aztecs' intellectual origins as the people of the moon, which are very clear. Quetzalcoatl also was one of the world's most advanced gods of peace, poetry, and learning. As the plumed serpent, he represented the shamanic yogic values of the snake and bird goddess, self-knowledge and transcendence through luminous experience of the three brains. But with growing secular abundance and power, the Aztec sun god, the war god, prevailed. Quetzalcoatl, the god of peace, fled Mexico as a fugitive. The mystic, militaristic worldview of Aztec sun god religion was elaborated by a priest and royal counselor in 1398. This priest declared that the whole purpose of human creation was to provide blood to feed the sun. And the Aztec Empire was the official provider of this blood. As a military dictatorship, the Aztec Empire engaged in continuous war for the sole purpose of capturing victims for sacrifice. At the peak of this priestly sun feeding, hundreds of people a day had their chests slit open and their hearts torn out. The bloody bodies were tossed down the temple pyramid stairs and piled up at the base. I saw a movie about this. And I watched them do that. I forgot what movie that is. I'm going to go back and find that movie. But yeah, the bloody bodies were tossed down the temple pyramid stairs and piled up at the base on top of that, the M word, the lady, the moon witch, that I can't pronounce. Melina. I'll just stop it at that. Melina. Okay, so the bloody bodies were tossed down the temple pyramid stairs and piled up at the base on top of the Melina stone, a giant circular carving showing the moon witch totally dismembered. Lacacleo had proclaimed that the tribes of Mexico were to be plundered for their flesh, the bodies rolled up and offered like warm tortillas to the sun. This was ruled by terror for some time. The entire social, economic, cultural, and religious life of Mexico was very effectively organized around this terror. Lest we dismiss it as barbaric, we should remember that under the reign of the nuclear sun god, attended by his global military priesthood, the entire modern world is ruled by the same terror. Next chapter, the jealous god. In ancient Sumeria, sheepfold also meant vulva. In Sumeria and Near Eastern myth and custom, the shepherd king was consecrated in a sacred marriage to the queen of heaven, Inanna Ishtar. Under the eroticized veils of the beautiful young queen was the primordial great mother, she of the fruitful Neolithic garden. As Thompson points out, the shepherd king Dumuzi ensures the prosperity of his people by being a good lover to the goddess Inanna. The biblical King David was also a sacred shepherd. His sensual and ecstatic songs of earthly love, so untypical of the Bible, derive from the ancient love rites of the shepherd king and the goddess. Her Canaanite names were Asherah, Astarte, Ashtoreth. The settled people of the Old Testament, like everyone else in the Near East, practiced goddess worship. The Old Testament is the record of the conquest and massacre of these Neolithic people by the nomadic Hebrews, followers of a sky god, who then set up their biblical god in the place of the ancient goddess. Okay, okay. Did you just hear what I just said? Think back to all the times when God said, like, okay, we gonna y'all shout the walls of Jericho down. Y'all go in there, y'all take from those people and y'all kill all the men and y'all take the all they was doing was gratitude to Mama. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you see this? The sky god that she's talking about right now is the war god Yahweh. And I'm up there, the walls of Jericho. Walls ain't coming down. We used to sing songs about this shit. We all were. Yo. All right. The Old Testament is the record of the conquest and massacre of these Neolithic people. Whoa. By the nomadic Hebrews, followers of a sky god who then set up their biblical god in the place of the ancient goddess. And I remember, the Bible would always say, break down, tear down, all like they had monuments built to the great goddess. These are the monuments that we had read about earlier in here. Monuments to the great goddess. You never saw monuments to a male god, but monuments built up to the great goddess. When I was reading all these years in the Bible, thou shalt break down those idols, those no idols. Thou shalt break down those stone idols, and you should set up my shrines. This what the fuck? This right here, what the fuck was going on? Yo. Okay, y'all. The biblical Hebrews were a nomadic, pastoral, and patriarchal people, tribes of sheep herders and warriors who invaded land belonging to the matriarchal Canaanites. One more side thing. The only other thing I want to say is, God damn, you mean to tell me you couldn't leave a motherfucker alone and just let them come to their own conclusion about you? God, that's crazy. Am I? The biblical Hebrews were a nomadic, pastoral, and patriarchal people, tribes of sheep herders and warriors who invaded land belonging to the matriarchal Canaanites. Both Hebrews and Canaanites were Semitic people. The Canaanites lived in agricultural communities and worshiped the orgiastic, ecstatic moon mother Astarte. As Old Testament stories relate, the Hebrews sacked, burned, and destroyed village after village belonging to the Canaanites, massacring or enslaving the people, a series of brutal invasions and slaughters described typically by theologians and preachers as a spiritual victory. In this way, the Hebrews established themselves on the land along with the worship of their sky and thunder god Yahweh, Jehovah, calling themselves his chosen people. Yahweh's male prophets and priests, however, despite their political victory over the Canaanites, had to carry on a continuous struggle and fulmination against their own people who kept backsliding into worship of the Great Mother and goddess of all their Near Eastern neighbors, for she had originally been the goddess of the Hebrews themselves. Now, okay, one more thing. I don't really, but the other thing is, I remember all the times I would read, and it's like, you better not take no wife from the Canaanite. She gonna have you work. This is, she's gonna have you worshiping what? It was the great mother. But uh, what do we mean when we say worship of the great mother? Study. I'm just gonna stop there. But see, okay, I can't just stop. I'm sorry. Last commentary though. But that goes back to just last week when it's like, here you, it, even the word worship shouldn't, it's really not. Let's just take that out for a second and just look at, again, we last week we just talked about how the mother is, you are, there's a symbiotic connection with the mother. You know what? I said I'm gonna do that. I'm just gonna just keep going. I'm gonna keep going. I'm just trying to read. It's so much to be said, so I'm not gonna do it. Okay. Um, this constant fight against matriarchal religion and custom is the primary theme of the Old Testament. It begins in Genesis with the takeover of the goddess's garden of immortality by a male god and the inversion of all her sacred symbols, tree, serpent, moon fruit, woman, into icons of evil. Of the two sons of Eve and Adam, Cain was made the evil brother because he chose settled agriculture, which is matriarchal, and the good brother, Abel, was a nomadic pastoralist, which is patriarchal. The war against the goddess is carried on by the prophets' rantings against the golden calf, the brazen serpents, the great harlot, and the whore of Babylon, or the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, against enchantresses, pythonic diviners, and those who practice witchcraft. It is in the prophets' war against the Canaanite worship of stone idols, or the triple moon goddess worshipped as three horned pillars. One of her shrines was on Mount Sinai, which means mountain of the moon. Moses, I just said that. Moses was commanded by the Lord to go forth and destroy these idols who all had breasts. We are told monotheism began with the Jews. We are told monotheism began with the Jews, that it was the great spiritual invention of the religious leader Moses. This is not so. We're told monotheism began with the Jews, that it was the great spiritual invention of the religious leader Moses. This is not so. The worship of one God, like everything else in religion, began with the worship of the goddess. Her universality has been duly noted by everyone who has ever studied the matter. Monotheism, quote, this is a quote, monotheism, once thought to have been the invention of Moses or Akhenaten, was worldwide in prehistoric and early historic world, i.e., through the Paleolithic and Neolithic ages. As E.O. James wrote in The Cult of the Mother Goddess, it seems that Evans was correct when he affirmed that it was a monotheism in which the female form of divinity was supreme. The original monotheism of the goddess is perhaps most clearly shown by the fact that in Elizabeth Gould Davis's words, quote, Almighty Yahweh, the God of Moses and the later Hebrews, was originally a goddess, unquote, end quote. His name, Ahuanat, derives from that of the Sumerian goddess Inanna. Yahweh, like all male gods, was the first bisexual goddess herself, then her son, then the lover of the goddess, a shepherd king. In his process of individuation from the goddess, he first appeared alongside her, as in the time of Jeroboam, the goddess shared the temple with Jehovah. Eventually, he was turned by his priests and warrior followers into the supreme and only God to enforce this new regime. The old goddess religion was damned, her people slaughtered, and the mostly stolen mythology of the new male god was written down by male prophets, a word that also meant poet, and thus given textual authority as the word of God. But still, the unimprovable original maintained her influence in the hearts, bodies, and minds of the people. So deeply ingrained was the goddess cult in Palestine that it survived all attempts at drastic reformation by the Yahwists until the end of monarchy. Baal is one of the gods hated so drastically by the biblical Hebrews. Baal is the Lord Baltus, meaning mistress and fair one. And this goddess was directly related to the Baal of the witches Beltane in pagan Europe. Whatever the Old Testament prophets have to say about these heathen idols, we must take with very large grains of salt, remembering that the prophets were the leaders of a holy political war against the people who worship the goddess. Moses then was not the inventor of monotheism, of the recognition of one God. He was rather one of the chief male priests and architects of the new religion of one male God against the Neolithic goddess. In the book, When God Was a Woman, Merlin Stone suggests that the ruling Levites, the Hebrew priest caste, were in fact of Indo-European Aryan origin and lineage belonging to that pastoral, were in fact of Indo-European Aryan origin and lineage, belonging to that pastoral warrior tradition of male sky gods, gods of light. In the biblical Leviticus, these Levite priests introduced the earliest, most punitive and misogynistic laws against women yet written down in those times. They seem consumed with hatred of the goddess and of women, especially the Canaanite and other neighboring matriarchal women who, in sensual joy and freedom, practiced their ancient moon rites. The Levite priesthood were intent on instituting patrilineal property and inheritance rights and the father-dominated family based on women's total submission, social degradation, and spiritual disinheritance. It follows that any sexual, economic, spiritual, or cultural freedom and autonomy in women, their own tribal women, or any women in the neighborhood, was seen by the Levite priests as a threat to their new regime. The Levites were themselves an elite class like the Hindu Brahmins, living in luxury and serviced by slaves. It is also true that Moses, the tribal leader and chief priest of the Old Testament Hebrews, lived at the palace of Ramses II, the great pharaoh dictator of Egypt. Ramses II was the secular architect of the sun god political regime in Egypt. Moses resented the captivity of the Jews under this pharaoh and based a good deal of his religious political ideology on this understandable resentment, as the Bible records. But Moses was also well treated in the pharaoh's palace and was educated there. Doubtless it was the political success of Ramses' secular spiritual sun god organization that inspired Moses to try to construct the same kind of male god political order for his own people. It is also true that the Hebrews spent generations of captivity in Babylon, and the major myths of the Old Testament, the garden story, the flood story, the historic struggle between the ancient agricultural goddess people and the new Bronze Age war god elites, were not original with the Hebrews, but taken by them from Semitic Babylonian legend and literature. Pre-patriarchal Levite priests and priestesses originated in Sinim, which meant land of the moon, and they wore headdresses in the shape of lunar crescents. Sin was the Babylonian moon god. That's Sin. Sin was the Babylonian moon god, and Sinim might have been Babylon or Sumer. Both Yahweh and Islamic Allah began as lunar gods or consorts of the goddess. Indeed, the Levite priests were originally serpent priests of the Great Mother. Levi is related to serpent, Leviathan, the world dragon of the goddess. Whether the biblical Levites derived from Aryan Indo-European roots or were Semites influenced by the all all-conquering Indo-European warrior influences of the Bronze Age, we don't know. But just as the later misogynistic and ascetic Essenes were once ecstatic priests of Artemis, it is very possible that patriarchal religion in the Near East, including the biblical religion of Yahweh, began in a violent revolt of these newly wealthy male priesthoods against the goddess they once served. In The Gate of Horn, G. Rachel Levy analyzes the character of Yahweh as the psychological historical projection of a Bronze Age people growing apart from their ancient ways. The Hebrew tribes were pastoralists on the move, showing the restlessness of mind and ego characteristic of the Bronze Age. They were no longer immersed in the mutual effort of ritual, the cyclic goddess rituals designed to maintain the equilibrium of seasonal recurrence and the growth and renewal of man and beast. Their concept of God correspondingly became detached from the earth. I was just talking about the symbiotic relationship with the mother. This is right there. This is going down the path I wanted to go down. The concept of God correspondingly became detached. Their concept of God correspondingly became detached from earth as they were experiencing themselves as detached, becoming separated, individuated, chosen as a people, no longer bound to the earthly cycles of the mother. As a result of this separation of the divine idea from its natural and animal affinities, the means of contact becomes gradually ethical. It is ironic that the concept of the male God and people's relation to him becomes more ethical as the behavior of his Bronze Age male followers becomes correspondingly more greedy, violent, plundering, and corrupt. But this is a paradox we cannot resolve, except to say that ethics can be a substitute for being there. The means of contact between the Hebrew tribes and their God was ethical in the sense of becoming more rationalized, linear, individual, and intellectual. The old, ecstatic, holistic experience of oneness with the earth and the goddess was gone. God could no longer be known, but instead had to be thought about and thought toward. God could no longer be known, but instead had to be thought about and thought toward. The patriarchal priesthood must design verbal descriptions of God in the form of rules for how to act to get God's attention. Y'all, see, I grew up all in this. I grew up all in this. I grew up all in this. This right here. The old ecstatic, holistic experience of oneness with the earth and the goddess was gone. God could no longer be known, but instead had to be thought about and thought toward. The patriarchal priesthood must design verbal descriptions of God in the form of rules for how to act to get this God's attention. Because God is no longer all pervasively there, looking out from the inside and in from the outside. Ethical, wait, I'm sorry. Because God is no longer all because I'm getting so excited, y'all. Okay. Because God is no longer all pervasively there, looking out from the inside and in from the outside. Ethical maps are written down to tell the mind and soul how to reach something that is acknowledged to be distant. And as people separate more and more from oneness within the body, within the earth, within the cosmos, religious doctrine takes on the form of instructional maps on how to get there, how to get back. But maps based on God as a misogynistic male cannot take people back to the female source, nor can an anti-earth, anti-physical God return us to the holistic epiphany of body, mind, and spirit inhabited as one. Baby, baby, baby. Okay, okay. Yeah. All right. In Deuteronomy 16:20, it is said, wait, you shall not plant any tree as an Asherah beside the altar of God. The Asherah was the Neolithic goddess Inanna Ishtar, Ashtarte, Ashtoreth, or Asherah, or it was the symbol of the goddess. It was a conventionalized or stylized tree perceived as she and planted therefore at all altars and holy places. This Asherah represented the goddess as Urikitu, the green one, the Neolithic mother, daughter of all vegetation, of agricultural knowledge and abundance. Yahweh's absolute hostility to the Asherah was the political hostility of the nomadic pastoral Hebrew people, or their priesthood at least, to the settled matriarchal cultures and their goddess beliefs. It became a psychological hostility to the entire living earth doctrinalized in the biblical text. This is now a quote from Deuteronomy. You must completely destroy all the places where the nations you dispossess have served their gods, on high mountains, on hills, under a spreading tree. You must tear down their altars, smash their pillars, cut down their sacred poles or their asherahs, set fire to the carved images of their gods, and wipe their name from that place. Deuteronomy 16:20. This hostility to the living earth, to its deities and symbols, and to all free manifestations of its life can sometimes be seen in the way some fundamentalist and especially Mormon churches are built, at least in the American West. Every green tree, flower, or bush is stripped away from the stark stone anti-terrestrial arrogance of the buildings. The Old Testament texts record the heroic age of the Hebrew people, the war god epics of their priestly and warrior castes. The Bronze Age saw an explosion of such epics throughout the Near East, Egypt, and India. Gilgamesh appeared as the ego of man, a new male being. Gilgamesh appeared as the ego of man, a new male being building a hostile identity vis-a-vis woman, mocking and dismissing the ancient mother goddess in acts ranging from ritual desecration and mythic rewriting to the sacrilegious rape, massacre, and plundering of whole settled peoples. In the Old Testament of the Bible, written circa 900 to 300 BC, this ego of man is set up as the Hebrews' new God. Yahweh, the pastoral God of cattle breeding, warfare, moralistic wrath, and misogyny, is the newly militant, self aggrandizing, and righteous male ego enthroned as God the Father, enemy of the mother. Bronze Age raiding, mass slaughter, and secular conquest of settled matriarchal peoples by the mobilized patriarchal war machine were ubiquitous activities, not confined to the Hebrew tribes. I don't see no. Oh, I like it. Not confined to the Hebrew tribes. The new element added by the Old Testament writers was the concept that became holy war. The Father God not only justified but commanded the slaughter of religious enemies, i.e., of people who believe differently. The Father God not only justified but commanded the slaughter of religious enemies, i.e., of people who believe differently. In particular, of people who believed in the old religion of the Neolithic goddess. The Hebrew warriors then were not just seeking conquest and wealth for personal glory, like other Bronze Age sun god warriors and epic heroes. No, their righteousness comes from the fact that they were also seeking to impose the right God, their new idea of the right God, on all their neighbors. Textually, the Old Testament becomes the first handbook of holy war, i.e., the first time such an ideology was written down as the rules of the game, as the game itself for a whole people. Both Christianity and Islam recognize the Old Testament as a sacred text. The historic fanaticism of both religions derives its holy war fervor and rationale from the words of the biblical prophets presented as the word of God. These words incite and justify religious war as the will of God. Yahweh is called the jealous God. What was Yahweh jealous of? Of the goddess and her lover, of their sacred sexual relation itself, and of its domination over the minds and hearts and bodies of generations of Neolithic people. This is why the God and religion of the Bible are identified so clearly from all other preceding gods and religions. The Bible God and his religion are based on a violently asexual or anti-sexual morality never before seen on earth. Sex, the source of life and pleasure of love, becomes the enemy of God. All the ancient people of the world embody the fused birth, life, and death giving powers of earth and a mother goddess. Recognition of this paradoxical functioning of earth was universal. The Bronze Age Hebrews apparently perceived this primordial paradigm of earth as birth mother, sex mother, and death mother, all three in one, and couldn't handle it. They feared and or resented it so profoundly that in their religion, unique among all world religions, they wholly exterminated the mother and her earth, and thereby evolution itself and the cycles of its processes from their concept of deity. Nothing of sacredness remains but Yahweh, the war and morality God. Yahweh who alone, Yahweh who alone among all male gods of the earth never has intercourse with a female. Baby. The yang has its yin. Sky fathers have earth mothers. Even the Vedic and later Indian male gods have female principals or other halves or wives with which they copulated. Not Yahweh. Yahweh is the only male god in the history of the world who never made love to a female or to the earth. In Christianity, this extraordinary phenomenon is continued in a son born without sex from a sexless virgin mother who counsels his male followers to excuse sex and femaleness forever if they want their spirits to reach heaven. Okay, I'm sorry, but wait, cause, cause when they lay with us, where they go? To heaven. Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, I can't believe the shit that I. That's what I'm saying. Focus. All right, guys. I'm sorry. Whoa. Okay, y'all. Wait a minute. Oh, okay. Thus, did the ancient Hebrew Bible writers deal with their male fear and hostility toward the female sex by eliminating the female sex entirely from the creation or purpose of the world. Biblical misogyny was not exclusively a spiritual opposition to the goddess on the part of Yahweh's priesthood. It also was part of the Bronze Age political project of dominating large numbers of people via a royal priestly elite. Female blood was a sacred element in the agricultural rituals of all Neolithic people, including the matriarchal Canaanites. Blood was poured over sacred stones. Female blood, menstrual blood, was the signature of the psychic, physical bonding of humans through the blood of their mothers and of the mother. Thus, in Leviticus, the Levite priests wrote down extremely punitive taboos and spiritual laws against female blood, menstrual blood, childbirth blood. What had been sacred for so long, the mother's bleeding for life was rewritten as a process of filth, shame, and physical spiritual corruption. When we know the significance of the ancient complex of woman, moon, menstrual blood in the Neolithic religions of humanity, and stretching back beyond even the Paleolithic, no doubt, then we can see the biblical portrayal of menses, woman, and sex as icons of filth and evil as a preeminently political move. This move was designed to take control over human life and the burgeoning Neolithic abundance by destroying the original communal bonding of people through the blood of their mothers, and to replace this with an enforced new hierarchic bonding based on the pastoral idea of a father god, keeper and breeder of herds. Female blood is tabooed, is no longer the medium of a spiritual communal bond. The new covenant is made with male blood, blood from the foreskins of circumcised male infants. This new tribal bond was elitist as well as sexist. The tribal god Yahweh was elevated to a one and only universal God, but still Yahweh was believed to recognize only the blood of Hebrew males in this special bonding, i.e., only Hebrew males can achieve this special relationship with God. For something like sacred group bonding menses to be denigrated to a corrupt process, as it is in the Bible, required a psychic overturning that was enormous. It wrenched the sexes out of balance to this day. We have still not recovered in the West from that act of primary alienation from the source of our earthly lives. No matter how sophisticated our technologies or how secular our lifestyles, we in the West, because our culture is so historically saturated with biblical imagery and worldview, still tend to be ruled by archetypal models of a male pastoral God whose power comes not from giving birth or enhancing life, but from dominating and breeding cattle herds as a sign of egoistic individual wealth, and dominating women as unclean but profitable cows as well. On that note, I'm gonna have to stop y'all because I am on fire. I am on fire. I told you I am on fire, and I'm gonna stop right there. Dr. B says that's true. Example: the woman with the issue of blood forced to stay indoors because she was seen as unclean. Yes, or forced to go out at the camp. Like I said many times now at this point. But I'm gonna stop here. We're on page 271.